Greetings, my fellow free and low sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LL3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful Mountaineer State, also known as West Virginia, and today's date is Monday, August 10th, 2020. Ooh, yeah, so just browsing around earlier today. It looks like Mike Adams giving people a heads up that things going to be hitting the fan. Stuff's going to be exposed. Pedophiliacs, traitors, puppets, etc. And maybe try to block everything else. Yeah, so hit natural news on that one. Very interesting. Hopefully everyone will be ready at the best of your abilities. Never take things for granted. We've been living in a dangerous world since the beginning of time. And even the founding fathers gave us a heads up on it. To be very frank. And of course, they're going to try to blame one person, Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, he has his faults as well. And I have criticized him on a good amount of his actions. But I can't throw everything on one person because that's unacceptable and it's called scapegoating. Which the mainstream garbage media wants to do, including all the elected hacks that sold their rear ends to the New World Order. Yes, it is a big political faction game, but it's getting a bit too obvious. So that's why I tell folks, the key to liberty is eternal vigilance. Jefferson once said to everyone, to the people. And that's the truth. If you're going to believe government knows best, it's going to turn into manure. And of course, you see more stuff about the whole BLM movement, which no one's really benefiting except for the technocrats. Yeah, they are communist pawns, but they're fun about multinational corporations. Just an example. Puppets on parade. Herd Conformity 101. Jim Jones, Pol Pot, all combined in one. Always observe responsibly as usual, folks. It's good to do that. And always judge them by their merits, or other words, actions. You will see a bigger picture. Sometimes I have folks try to ask me about the posting of that one about the white race is dying, or the white Europeans are dying. It's just an example of what's going on, a form of democide. It's happening in all walks of life. Some people didn't like it. Some people claim I'm dodging questions. Technically, I'm not. All you got to do is listen. Listen to what I had to say. It's self-explanatory. People that know me for a long time understand that completely, and I thank you for it. The whole goal is to have 500 million people live on the planet Earth. That's according to the Georgia Guidestones, which is in, I believe, Elbert County, Georgia. Their form of peace and harmony is control people, but they have it in a nice, elegant way that was carved in their those particular stones. Well, something I have to say just to clear my mind and so forth. Not confused, but you know how people are. You got folks out there want to prejudge, you want to play the straw man, psychic vampire, etc. Avoid them at all costs. Laugh at them too. Ridicule. Out of love. Alright, well, it looks like the whole thing was going on. Everyone's mocking or talking about what happened with the stimulus, COVID-19 stimulus package. And there were so many sides. They all want to point the finger. However, you always got to see things a lot more than what it is. So President Trump took that chance, signed some executive orders, including $400 a week on that one order pertaining to unemployment. And he did use the Stratford Act. I'm going to do an article on that and all this printing of money out of thin air from Mises.org. So, this one came out yesterday by the nationalinterest.org. Donald Trump's reckless economic gamble came out yesterday. It is far from clear that Mr. Trump's executive order will do much to kickstart the economy. Employed workers receiving temporary payroll tax relief will know this is only a tax deferment that will have to be paid soon after the election. As such, they are likely to be very cautious about spending that temporary windfall, especially in an environment of great economic uncertainty about their future job prospects. Meanwhile, those 15 million cash-strapped unemployed workers who now will be receiving only half the weekly supplement to their benefits that they were receiving before are bound to be forced to cut back heavily on their spending. And I have to agree what Desmond Lockman has to say. And as it reads here, President Trump understands full well that when it comes to presidential elections, it is generally the economy. Stupid. He also knows that in November, when he goes to the polls, he will be doing so with the United States still experiencing the worst economic slump and its highest unemployment rate in the last 90 years. Yet, despite the economy's sorry state, Mr. Trump is far from throwing in the towel in the economic issue. Instead, he is hoping that electors will ask themselves not whether they were better off today than they were 4 years ago, but rather whether they were better off now than they were 6 months ago at the COVID-19 pandemic's economic low point. At the same time, Mr. Trump is trying to cast himself as someone who is actively doing something responsible about the economy, in contrast to an obstructionist and spendthrift Democratic Congress. This all explains why Mr. Trump decided to break off stimulus negotiations with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and to go it alone with his executive order. There's a link for that. You can read it for yourselves. By temporarily deferring the employee payroll tax contribution, he is hoping that employed workers will thank him for their paychecks boosted on the eve of the election. He is hoping that renters will thank him for preventing them from being evicted, while unemployed workers will thank him for the extension of their unemployment supplement, I bet, at the reduced rate of $300 rather than $600 a week. Actually, it's $400. So he had it originally. So the main risk for Mr. Trump's strategy is that this executive order might fall well short of what is now needed to avoid a double-dip economic recession before the election. Heightening the chances that this could occur is a pandemic's recent resurgence, coupled with dire warning from U.S. health experts about a likely second wave this fall. This now already seems to be halting the U.S. economy in its tracks. As Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell recently noted, high-frequency economic data on consumer demand, as well as disappointing employment figures, are suggesting that the U.S. economy might already be plateauing at an unexpectedly high unemployment rate. It is not just that many states are responding to the pandemic's recent resurgence by rolling back at least a part of the earlier lifting of their lockdowns. Rather, it is also that individuals are adjusting their behavior in a manner that is putting renewed pressure on those very sectors of the economy that have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. With the pandemic raging, the American public once again appears to be increasingly reluctant to travel. Frequent restaurants were engaged in indoor shopping. It is far from clear that Mr. Trump's executive order will do much to kickstart the economy. Employed workers receiving temporary payroll tax relief will know that this is only a tax deferment that will have to be paid soon after the election. As such, they are likely to be very cautious about spending their temporary windfall, especially in the environment of a great economic uncertainty about their future job prospects. Meanwhile, those 15 million cash-strapped unemployed workers who now will be receiving only half the weekly supplement to their benefits that they were receiving before are bound to be forced to kick back heavily on their spending. It is also well known that investors abhor political uncertainty and gridlock. One would think that Mr. Trump's showdown with the Democrats might confirm investors' worst fear about the U.S. becoming ungovernable and might induce them to scale back on their investment plans before we get greater political stability. At the same time, the severely cash-strapped states, to which Mr. Trump is denying support and asking them instead to foot a quarter of the bill for the weekly unemployment supplement, are being forced to slash spending to balance their budgets. While there certainly is room to debate whether or not the U.S. economy will have another leg down before the November election, of one thing we can be certain: if the U.S. economy falters again, Mr. Trump will be the last to take the blame. Rather, he will be pointing fingers at Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for their failure to strike a deal with him on a bipartisan stimulus package. Of course, you have to expect that. This is how the game goes. And the truth of the matter is, folks, like I say, he has his faults, don't get me wrong, but we need the United States obligations is to end the debt instead of doing another debt limit every single time, 2, 3, 4 years. It's absolutely absurd and unhealthy for our constitutional republic. We got a lot of clowns for a very long time. Debt ceiling fetish. Doesn't matter what party they're in. What ruined the U.S. Constitution were political parties. One's not better than the other. We just say two separate wings from the same buzzard. Yeah, so Trump's going to take a chance. Yeah, he'll be partially to blame for it. But like I tell everybody before, don't throw everything on his lap. It's been happening this stuff has been going on for a very long time, way before you and I were born, many of us out here that are listening. When you got central banking, that was the biggest mistake Woodrow Wilson made. And so was Abraham Lincoln. Then Lincoln got double-crossed by them. And the Secretary of Treasury told him to use greenbacks, interest-free money. That's the reason why he got assassinated. John Wilkes Booth was a great patsy. He has his reasons. The banksters have theirs. That's why I tell folks, if you're going to use that money, invest in gold and silver the best you can, because that's sound money. If that collapses, you at least got something. You got some bartering tools. I'm doing it myself, okay? And get yourself stocked up the best you can on everything. Not out of fear, but in good faith. We'll just see how the chips fall. But be prepared and make sure all your neighbors are in the same boat, regardless of your political differences. Speaking of printing money out of thin air, which this whole thing with the stimulus is mainly fiat money, which happened in 1971, like again, 1971, when the Nixon administration and the federal chairman, what's that dude's name? Arthur Burns, decided to get the old standard out. Now look what's happening. Boom! Inflation. Another good one here came from Mises.org, under the Mises Wire. Throwing printed money as this problem won't make it go away. And this is what Mr. Bryce McBride has to say. If while driving your car you suddenly notice that you were heading straight for a cliff edge, of course the sensible thing to do would be to apply the brakes and sharply turn the wheel. If, however, rather than traveling by yourself, you were instead driving a carload of children holding bowls of hot soup, you might choose to maintain your speed and direct while opening a newspaper up in front of you for the next few moments by keeping the car stable and the children unaware of any pressing danger. You have it made unlikely that they will spill hot soup on themselves and suffer burns. However, while by ignoring and obscuring the problem of the approaching cliff edge, you have kept your passengers' claim and their soup in their bowls. You have solved nothing. By failing to break or turn, you have ensured that you will all plunge over the edge of the cliff in a fatal crash. This analogy almost perfectly describes the current economic and political situation in the West. Ever since Alan Greenspan was sworn in as Federal Reserve Chairman in 1987, central banks, and in particular the U.S. Federal Reserve System, have taken upon themselves to smooth out any disturbances in asset markets through interest rate cuts and other forms of intervention. They didn't take on this ill-conceived responsibility entirely on their own. In response to the Black Monday crash of October 1987, which saw a one-day drop over 22% in stock prices, the Reagan administration established the Working Group on Financial Markets, colloquially known as the Plunge Protection Team, PPT, which brought together representatives from the Treasury, the Securities, U.S. Treasury, the Securities Exchange Commission, or SEC, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, as well as the Fed. The PPT is responsible for enhancing the integrity, efficiency, orderliness, and competitiveness of our nation's financial markets and maintaining investors' confidence. Referring to our analogy above, then their job is to occasionally open a metaphorical newspaper across the windshield in order to prevent investors from seeing the inherited dangers of, and therefore demanding, meaningful reform to the current dollar-based international financial system. And so, in crisis after crisis, the Mexican peso crisis of 1994, the Asian financial crisis of 1997, the related collapse of the long-term capital management in 1998, the dot-com collapse of 2000, and finally the global financial crisis of 2008. The PPT has acted to, at all costs, maintain investor confidence through lowering interest rates. The trend is clear. From 1992 through to 2002, interest rates fell over 18% to under 2%, printing money and increasingly in recent years directly purchasing financial assets to support prices. The problem with such an approach, though, is that if financial markets are to work, both the positive and negative price signals they generate and convey need to be seen and felt. Just as the driver needs to make his passengers spill their bowls of hot soup and suffer scalding pain in order driving over the cliff. So to do, governments and central banks need to allow over-indebted financial situations to feel the pain of periodic credit crisis and falling asset prices. If this pain is not felt and asset bubbles are allowed to inflate for too long, then either their eventual popping will lead to a deep depression of their continued inflation, will result in a monetary crisis with a political and social disorder typically accompanying either outcome. Looking at the 2008 crisis, the signal that ought to have been conveyed was that the natural consequences for issuing fraudulent housing loans to borrowers with no income, no job, and no assets, ninja loans, then securitizing such loans into bundles and selling them onto clueless investors after arranging for ratings agencies and misleadingly brand them as AAA was bankruptcy and jail time for the institutions and individuals involved. Instead, late fall of 2008, the Fed and other leading central banks having already dropped interest rates to below 1% for the first time in history, introduced quantitative easing, QE, to further support banks and the stock markets, with interest rates at record lows and trillions of dollars of newly created money flowing out of the Fed and into the banking system and the stock market. Asset prices began an ascent, which has continued for more than a decade. The too big to fail institutions which took part in the swindle are more powerful than ever, and none of the individuals involved have gone to jail. Bailed out and protected, no pain was felt, no lessons were learnt, and hence no changes were made. But at what cost? One consequence of throwing trillions of dollars of paper at the windshield has been almost completely abandonment of prudence. For the past 12 or perhaps even 20, 30 years, the path to riches has to borrow and speculate. Banks, hedge funds, corporations, and even households are all committed on taking on as much debt as they can, because they are confident that in the face of any market turbulence, the PPT and central banks will intervene to push up asset prices to save them from ruin. Given this background, it should not surprise anyone that companies which earned billions of dollars of profits over the past decade, having spent it all on stock buybacks and acquisitions, have been pushed toward bankruptcy by the coronavirus pandemic and consequent shutdown. Clearly, the lack of prudence encouraged by PPT central bank intervention has made our economy a great deal more fragile and vulnerable to stocks. The end game of increasing fragility being papered over with greater debt and money printing, though, is clear to see for everyone with an obstructed view, as people initially, probably foreigners, see more money created from nothing. And as they begin to notice rising prices, they will lose confidence in paper currencies as a store of value. As the author of Jim Rackards has put it, someday, sooner or later, confidence will be lost very quickly. Then you will have your inflation all at once. Another consequence has been rising inequality. People who have bought stock bonds or real estate before the mid-2000s have been made very wealthy by interest rate suppression and QE programs implemented to save financial systems after 2008. However, people who were either too poor or too young to have done so now find themselves both locked out of the middle class and increasingly pushed into poverty by rising prices for the essentials of life, such as housing, education, and healthcare. Given this reality, it is any wonder that frustrated and angry people are engaged in civil unrest in places like the U.S., Hong Kong, Chile, and France. All those paper trillions thrown against the windshield to maintain confidence and the financial sector from suffering capital losses have acted like tinder needing only spark, such as the death of George Floyd, to be set alight. And so, we now face two dangers. The crisis we faced in 2008 has not gone away, as we failed to heed its warnings to change course and reduce debt levels. Instead, it has become bigger and more dangerous as, to obscure the risk we face, we proceeded to pile up even more of the debt had made the economy so susceptible to the crisis in the first place. The soup bowls are now filled to the brim. What can you say? He's absolutely correct. Always have to look at those things, my friends. Fiat money is dangerous. All you got to do is look at history, especially the fall of the Reichsmark in Weimar Republic of Germany in the 1920s, 28. Economy collapsed because they put money out of thin air. That's how the Nazis got into power. That's how Hitler became from Chancellor to the Führer. So, like I said before, my friends, you cannot blame anyone particular. You got to get them all across the board. Yes, the central banks are dangerous. They're the first ones to go. The Federal Reserve are a criminal institution. Like it or not. Look what happened to Greece. Give you an example. It's not capitalism at all. Don't even use that because it is irrelevant and void. This is why people, be ready. If you got property and land, you're a step ahead of everyone else. And a lot of folks out there are leaving the cities. The taxaholic state, from the taxaholic with the taxaholic attributes, including the states like New York and Illinois. This is why I always look at things in a bigger picture. And trust me, if you do, you got a better chance of surviving, you and your family and your loved ones, including your neighbors. And that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you want to send something that's interesting you want to check out, I want to check out. Wherever you do, please send your correspondence with decorum. Furthermore, I will leave the footnotes of these 2 articles on my Spreaker page. If you want to do donations, you can hit me at paypal.me/LokiLuck3, which is all together. And I encourage the rest of you folks support these organizations which I help interpret or narrate it, because I thank them for putting the word out and putting their information. So if you support them, that'd be great. Subscribe, donate, be a member. I encourage it. All right. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.